Chapter 31. Zach lay on the couch staring into the darkness and wishing he could sleep. Sitting here with Dani had awakened every sense he'd known he had and more. The sound of her breathing and the scent of her shampoo had teased him while he'd watched the old TV show with her. The silky softness of her hair and the comforting weight of her head on his leg. He'd tried to concentrate on the TV, but had more than once found himself watching her, thinking things he no longer had any business thinking. Lying here, he closed his eyes and unbidden images of Dani appeared. Her laughing, teasing him. The half-hidden, hungry look she'd given him just before she'd pulled him down to kiss her earlier this evening. His dick throbbed and he rolled over, wishing he had better control over his body than this. He wanted her. Wanted her bad, but even though she'd asked him to stay, he couldn't. Not when she was drugged with sleep and a little alcohol. Not when it would shock Mark to find them in bed tomorrow morning. It wasn't that he didn't want to climb into that bed beside her, pull her into his arms and strip her out of her clothes. He did. But he wanted to do it right. She was more important than a one-night stand, and he wanted to prove it to her. He needed to show her what she meant to him, and that this time he intended things between them to last the rest of their lives and beyond. Sliding into bed with her now wouldn't do that. Staying where he was, sleepless on the sofa, was one of the hardest things he'd ever done. But Zach reminded himself it was worth it. If his suffering tonight made a future with Dani and Mark possible, then he'd do it 100 times over if he had to. Zach got up early, just as the sun was peeking over the horizon. He'd spent hours lying still, hoping to get a little sleep, and when it had started to get light, he'd gotten up and made coffee. With as little sleep as he'd managed, coffee was going to be his friend and possibly his salvation, today. Not wanting to wake either Mark nor Dani, he took his coffee mug out onto the deck and watched the sun rise over the lake. The bright colors reflected on the mostly still waters reminded him of a painting, but he couldn't remember who the artist had been. He'd seen many similar sunrises in the several years since he'd moved into the cabin, but that didn't make any one less spectacular. Once the sun was up and started burning off the morning dew, Zach picked up his empty mug and took it inside. The others would be up soon if they weren't already, and he wanted to get started on breakfast. Waffles, he thought, along with eggs and sausage, sounded good. If Dani wasn't up by the time he was through cooking, then he and Mark might have to take her breakfast in bed. The thought of her sleepy smile as they took her breakfast did things to his stomach. Zach whistled tunelessly as he pulled out ingredients and got busy.